Hey everybody, thanks for checking us out here as part of the Check Down Chatter fantasy football coverage. Don't forget to check us out at checkdownchatter.com Sunday morning for live start and sit advice here for week 9. Set your clocks back, come to the site, check us out. We'll go through your questions. But if you don't have time for that, or if you're just trying to get some justifications for the ranks here, I'm going to put this video together and help explain why I have some of the guys where I have them, especially when it goes against the trend, it goes against expert consensus. So we'll start with the 4 big fantasy football positions and dive right into the quarterbacks. It's worth noting that this week, a lot of the big guys, the elite group, like say Matt Ryan, have tough matchups this week. Him against the Cowboys, Tom Brady on a bye. Even the top 3 that we have here face so-so matchups. It's a reality of the way the week played out, but you can still find certainly worthwhile starters in that elite group. We also have number 4, Matt Stafford. Might be a bit of an overreaction to his strong week last week. Finally threw multiple touchdown passes. Looked like a guy who could really produce for his real team and for your fantasy teams. But I don't think it's just a jump as a result of that. I think that we have to look at the matchup he has here against Jacksonville, and I know that they just did a pretty good job with another NFC North quarterback. But outside of that, they've been getting lit up by quarterbacks this season. The last 4 games prior to shutting down Aaron Rodgers, they've given up more than 20 points to fantasy quarterbacks in 4 straights. That includes Andrew Luck, Andy Dalton, Jay Cutler, and Carson Palmer. And Stafford's going to be a better option than all of those guys. So I think knowing that, you've got to go ahead and start him against the Jags. Looking at the 6, 7, and 8 ranks, we've got a troika of mobile guys who can run the ball coming in here. For RG3, the top 10 rankings just kind of par for the course right now. You're always going to have him in your starting lineup unless you have a really legitimate option in a week. And for Vic and Newton, it's really about anticipating a bounce-back performance for them. Starting with Vic at number 6, the Saints just give up a ton of yardage and a ton of points. They've given out the most total yards of any team in football this season by a significant margin, by more than 50 yards over the next closest. So I think it's fair to say that the yards are going to be there for the taking, both on the ground and through the air for Michael Vick. They're also giving up 22.59 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. So again, lots of points there. And any quarterback not named Matt Castle has put up 19 points or more against the Saints this season, which is a very serviceable number. It's probably going to be top 6 this week. So no reason to think that Michael Vick will play like Matt Castle. He's not a guy named Matt Castle. So we're going to look for the 19, 20, 21 point range out of Michael Vick, and you could do a lot worse than that this week. Then there's Cam Newton, who comes back at number 8 in the rankings after landing somewhere around 15 in our ranks last week. Cam's got a great matchup, too. He faces a Redskins pass D that allows the most passing yards per game to opposing quarterbacks and the most passing touchdowns in the league at 19 on the season. So no reason to think that Cam can't put a few balls into the end zone and again tack on some points running the ball. He should be right in the same range as Vic and RG3 this week, somewhere between 18 and 22 points. No reason not to make use of him if you've got him. Just looking again at the top 12, everybody else is pretty standard. Again, we mentioned we have Matt Ryan a little lower than usual, but the matchup is tough this week. And then Matt Schaub sneaks into the top 12 this week. He becomes a very low-end quarterback 1 for your team. It's based on the home matchup off a bye in a game where I think that there's going to be lots of points scored between Buffalo and Houston. On the surface, this kind of seems like a game where Houston's going to run the ball against a run defense that doesn't really stop anybody in Buffalo. But Ben Tate is hurt in this one, so they could only rely on Arian Foster and the secondary guys there so much. So I think that you'll see Matt Schaub have to pass it a little bit, certainly in the early going, and I think that there's enough of an opportunity there against Buffalo to do some fantasy scoring in the early going. We've got Jay Cutler at 15 this week. He faces the Tennessee Titans, and frankly, he should be a lot higher. This is a very juicy matchup against the Titans. They haven't held a single fantasy QB under 15 points this season, so they're giving up points to everybody they face. But Chicago's struggling. They've shown that they're struggling on offense, I should say, and they're struggling for fantasy teams outside of Matt Forte and Brandon Marshall. They've shown that they'll only let Cutler pass enough to win, which is great. It keeps him healthy, keeps him out of making turnovers in high percentage situations, keeps the offense moving, but it doesn't help your fantasy team, and it won't help them this week despite the strong matchup against the Titans. Speaking of what look like good matchups, we got Joe Flacco coming off a bye and facing the Cleveland Browns. It's a top 6 matchup there. They give up a lot of points to opposing fantasy quarterbacks. But in the last 2 weeks in a row, they've held opposing passers without a touchdown through the air. Andrew Luck got a couple on the ground against them, but they haven't been passed on for a touchdown in 2 weeks, and they've held both quarterbacks they faced under 200 yards. Joe Hayden's been back for 3 weeks. He did get beat around by A.J. Green and the Bengals a little bit, but after that, he got back into rhythm, and I don't think it's a coincidence that this pass defense has seen their numbers improve significantly. So I'd stay away from Flacco if I had other options, as I'm hoping you do. Moving along now to the running backs. We've got Trent Richardson in at number 4. Last time he faced the Baltimore Ravens, he had 100 total yards of offense. He had a score, and we heard the Ravens come out and say this week that they felt it was a struggle to tackle him. They felt that Trent Richardson was one of the hardest guys to bring down in the NFL, which is saying something in his rookie year. We knew, though, coming into the season he was going to be a tough tackle. He proved it against the Ravens when he faced them previously, and he also proved it last week going out there in the rain against San Diego. I think he's ready to produce a gain in this one. I expect Trent Richardson to remind them of how tough he is to tackle, and we also have to remember that in that last 100-yard effort, this was a stronger Ravens team than it is right now. Looking at number 6, we've got Marshawn Lynch against the pretty good Minnesota Vikings defense, but the Vikings go on the road, and we know that Lynch is a different style of runner than Doug Martin, but we watched Martin gash the Vikes. We also watched Rod Stevens-Howling put up 150 total yards against them, so it's easy to see why in recent weeks this Vikings defense hasn't done a lot to excite us, and why we think that Marshawn Lynch has a good shot to make it 3 straight 100-yard rushers yielded by the Vikings. At number 8, on the heels of an impressive week, we have Willis McGahee. He's doing a great job of hitting the holes, but he's also just getting a chance to score because of Denver's prolific offense. This week he gets a Bengals defense that has given up a rushing touchdown to a running back in every game but one this year. So the opportunity, because of the opponent, should be there to put the ball into the end zone, but also just because he plays for Denver. I think McGahee is a great play every week, and he's always a good shot to put it in the end zone for 6. Speaking of Doug Martin a few minutes ago, many are going to overreact to his big game against Minnesota. He's actually had a couple of those games this season. We've got to like him. I've got him inside my running back top 12 here, so he's a very, very good RB1 for your team this week. But we've got to remember that part of that was, well, it's just one game, so let's see him do it time over time again. And we've also got to wonder how Carl Nicks is going to affect things this week. Nicks, as you know, has been lost for the season. He's one of the premier left guards in all of football, and without him, Tampa Bay's offensive line is going to struggle to run block. Martin averages 4.5 yards a carry when he's running to Nicks' side. He does okay up the middle, but he also just averages 3.2 yards per carry to the right-hand side of the field. So he counts on running the ball to that side, and maybe he'll still be successful doing it to the left side. But we do have to worry a little bit that without a guy like Nicks in there, he may struggle this week and in weeks moving forward. Plus, the matchup against Oakland at 3.9 yards per carry isn't all that good. However, Michael LaSure, he's a guy with a good matchup this week. He was injured coming out of the game last week. There was some ambiguity about that. Then he was on the injury report this week, and now he's cleared of it. Looks like he's going to be good to go. Looks like he's full health this week. And if he is, he's getting a Jaguars D that gives up 23.31 fantasy points per game to opposing rushers. He might be going to yield third down work to Joique Bell for the rest of the season. They're going to want to keep both those guys fresh. But I believe that his role on first and second downs is plenty against the Jaguars defense that is giving up fantasy points to running backs at a pretty good clip. 16, Chris Johnson slides quite a bit from where we had him put last week, and I said last week in this very spot, we're using Johnson really as a matchup play and nothing more right now. Again, he's still going to be an okay running back too, but in putting up his 3 solid recent weeks, he's faced pretty soft run defenses. He really did some damage, as we know, against Buffalo, but they haven't stopped anybody this year. Chicago Bears, not all that soft. I go lower on him if I could, but there aren't a lot of other options below him, and we do have to respect the fact that he's given us 3 serviceable weeks after a slow start to the season, but against the Bears, I'm really not expecting much out of CJ. At number 18, right behind him, we've got Jonathan Stewart, and we know that the Panthers had said he's the starting running back. He's going to be the bell cow for them, and they're going to try to look to run the offense through the running back to take some of the responsibility off Cam Newton. I think it's a wise play. I just think that last week against the Bears, it didn't work so well because, as we just said, this is a tough D against the run and in all facets of the game. They were tough on Stewart last week, no doubt, but he did get plenty of volume. And this week, he faces a much different matchup against Washington. And I think that if he gets the same volume, he'll be much more productive with his work. And I think you can easily start Jonathan Stewart as a mid-range running back too and just hope for upside this week. Getting into the wideouts now, we're looking at the Seattle Seahawks first as a matchup that isn't so great. They've got a deserved reputation as a tough pass defense, but they have allowed at least one startable fantasy wideout in every game they've played this year, giving up 10-plus points to one player every time out. This includes Titus Young last week, who had a really big week, of course, against them with about 22 points and 2 touchdowns. And also, we've learned about Seattle that they are susceptible to the short pass game. They've got the big, strong physical corners who can do well getting guys off their spots, kind of playing man coverage. But if you can hit a guy open in space and let him run, then they can be beat. And, of course, that's Percy Harvin's game. They're going to find lots of different ways to get him involved for Minnesota this week. And I think that, as it has all season, the offense goes through him and AP, and I think he'll still get plenty of work against the Seahawks. Number 12, there are tons of points that always go up against Washington, 2 opposing wide receivers, 2 opposing players of all sorts, but 2 opposing wideouts. We've already talked about expecting a bounce-back game from Cam Newton, and he's going to have to do that going through Steve Smith because this week Brandon LaFell is doubtful with a head injury, so assuming Smith is the number 1 guy on the field this week, he's going to get all kinds of targets, and he should deliver a very useful fantasy line for his owners this week. I've got him in my top 12. At number 19, right as a mid-range wide receiver 2, we've got Denarius Moore. He's scored a touchdown in 4 of his 6 games this season, and in the off games, he hasn't given you less than 6.7 fantasy points, so he's very usable. But right now, Oakland's offense, their ceiling is pretty low, They're a low-yield unit, so I think that you just treat him as a high-ceiling wide receiver too, maybe a guy who can pop a score or grab a long pass and turn in a really useful fantasy day. But he's always going to give you something. He is their number 1 pass receiving target right now, ahead of Darius Heyward-Bey. So he's going to give you some points. He's going to be worth using. Go out there and start Denarius Moore, but let's not get overhyped about his recent touchdown binge. Now at number 11 or number 27, depending on how you're looking at this, we've got Calvin Johnson. A little low. He's still a wide receiver 1. You're still going to use him. At 27, we've got Titus Young. He's coming off a really big week, as we just mentioned, against the Seahawks. He's not going to score 2 touchdowns every time out, but with Calvin Johnson not being as effective as he wants to be and also missing practice all week and still going out there to play, he's going to be good enough to take defensive attention away from Titus Young, but not so good that he dominates all the targets this week. So I think that we're going to see an uptick in targets for everybody on that Lions offense, not named Calvin Johnson. Titus Young, Ryan Broyles, and we'll get to Brandon Pettigrew in the tight end section. So I think Titus Young is going to be a wide receiver 3 starter for your team for the rest of the year if you're lucky enough to own him. And it's worth noting that the opponent this week has given up 7 points or more to 2 receivers in 4 of 7 games this season. So that's a really complex way of explaining things, but there's a good chance that you're getting 2 usable fantasy wideouts out of them, and that's why we've got both CJ and Titus Young inside our top 36 this week. Now, on the other side of that game, we've got the Jaguars coming to town with Cecil Shorts as the main attraction. Justin Blackman hasn't really developed, as we know. Cecil Shorts has had a couple of hot weeks recently, and they've now shipped Mike Thomas out of town to those Lions. So there aren't a lot of other options. Blaine Gabbert seems really comfortable with him, and Gabbert, he has his ups and downs. He's coming off a decent week last week, and if he's productive, it's going to be because he's going through Cecil Shorts. So I've got Shorts firmly inside the wide receiver 3 spot this week. I think you could use him over guys like Brian Hartline below him, questionable guys like Santana Moss, other people of that nature. Go ahead and use Shorts because he's sure been productive lately. Now, jumping right into the tight ends and wrapping this up, Jason Witten's higher than he's ever been this season for me, but easy to remember why. He just had 18 catches against the Giants. And we did that in a game that Dallas trailed, and also a game where the Dallas was clearly struggling throwing deep, so they looked for Witten over the middle. But we heard Tony Romo come out after that game and saying, well, I just wish we played a call like that, like we were losing all game long. And he's asked for it. I think the Cowboys would be foolish to turn away from it right now with how productive Witten was against the Giants. And I'd expect him to keep Romo in his comfort zone all game, keep him from making mistakes. That means keeping him going through his buddy Jason Witten. So I think you're going to expect another big game out of him. At number 4, it's a little high for Heath Miller, but I ranked him up pretty high last week, and he gave us a score. And as long as he keeps getting those red zone targets from Ben Roethlisberger, particularly in a week where Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez and some of your other top tight end options are off the board due to the bye or due to injury, I think you've got to go with Heath Miller. He's getting those red zone looks, as I said. He's making good use of them. He's a very startable tight end right now. Number 5, we've got Jermaine Gresham, which is, again, the highest I've ranked him all year. But he's coming off a bye. He's well rested. And we can name 5 players right now, 6 of them, in fact, who've done pretty well against their opponent this week. Jimmy Graham, Antonio Gates, Rob Gronkowski, Owen Daniels, Tony Gonzalez, and the aforementioned Heath Miller. Now, those are all tight ends in the upper echelon, certainly in the TE1 range. It's clearly a good group, but it's done something that's caused, the Bengals' opponents this week to give up the 3rd most fantasy points allowed per game to opposing tight ends. Again, they face a pretty good group, but they're getting beat by that group, and I think Gresham can join them this week. I think that he gives you a very serviceable line against Denver. Also, because Denver's going to put up some points on offense, so we'd have to expect that Cincinnati has to pass the ball to stay in this game. That means good looks for A.J. Green. It also means lots of looks, presumably, for Gresham, so he's very usable this week. At number 7, we've got Brandon Pettigrew. We know that the Jaguars give up the 10th most yards per game through the air. Again, I mentioned that he's going to get some of those looks that Calvin Johnson might look if he's not getting off coverage because he is banged up a little bit. In the post-Burleson era, Brandon Pettigrew's first game of that era, last week, he gave us his 2nd most productive week. 2nd most yards, 2nd most catches of the season. I think he's got lots to give this week for you. Number 11, we got Greg Olsen. He hasn't done a whole lot fantasy-wise this season, but he does have a good matchup against the Redskins. And again, I mentioned Brandon LaFell probably missing that game, so Cam Newton's going to have to toss the ball to somebody. At number 13, just outside TE1 status, I got Joel Dreesen. He's a guy you can go and get off your waiver wire most likely. And he's had just 2 targets and 0 catches last week. But I really think that he factors into a game against the Bengals, who give up a lot of points to tight ends. I think he's worth using. Roll him out there if you don't have a better option this week. If you don't have one of our TE1 guys, hope you can grab him and plug him in and get some useful points out of him. That's it. A little whirlwind 15-minute tour here through our fantasy lineups this week. Don't forget to check us out at checkdownchatter.com again, 10 a.m. on Sunday. Any other questions through the week, always hit us, but those are the ranks. Those are the explanations. I hope you found them useful, and good luck this week.